Salvi's Search for the Universe. Chapter 1. Salvi stared fixedly at the crumpled map pinched primly between her two claws, with a skip in her step and a brightness on her face. That 2 weeks of walking through the rough and brush had not yet managed to wear away. Soggy peat moss squelched between her reptilian toes as she trudged through the muddy shade-sweltered swamp. The sound of fast-flowing water roared to her left. Her map, which was actually a crumbling piece of tree bark that had been hurriedly scrawled upon by some human traders passing by her kobold hovel deep in the rocky Dunham Hills, told the approximate location of the human city of Einkerk. She had set out, brimming with such excitement she could barely put one foot in front of the other without wanting to run in circles. It was only after 3 days she realized she did not know how to read it, and spent the rest of the week and the next one after that wandering aimlessly in the vague direction the humans seemed to have come from. But after days of intense scrutiny and unparalleled analysis, the answer came to her in a brilliant flash of inspiration. The 2 squiggly lines, both close but never touching, as if one was deliberately attempting to annoy the other by making a show of how not touching they were. They were actually a river. After this brilliant deduction, Salvi began following the river she had found like a religion. Through the marshes and knee-deep mud, the craggy slopes and thick brushes with hook-like barbs, she continued on, never letting the river slip out of her sight. Sure, narrow paths littered the forests and plains, like the innards of an anthill, but who could afford to follow those? She had followed one of those near the start of her journey and ended up walking around in a circle 5 times before realizing it. No, paths could not be trusted. So she told herself as the mud and muck slowly changed her scale color from ochre red to fecal brown. She opened her mouth and snapped one of the fat swamp beetles buzzing nearby. It tasted horrible, but her anticipatory, almost vacuous excitement remained undaunted. Even after the next 2 she snapped both stung her tongue on the way down. It was better than the bark and stones she had been eating lately, at the very least. Yes, she always focused on the positives. Not much as an axiom to be followed, but more because she appeared to be blissfully unaware that most negatives in her life even existed. Flakes of bark drifted into the breeze as she folded the map and stuffed it into the breast of her tattered clothes, in certainty that she was heading in the right direction, despite the fact that even humans would have found it difficult to make sense of a disintegrating mess that passed for a map, which had already been an unbelievably crude approximation when it was whole and fresh. She stepped over sharp reeds that would have punctured human feet with blissful ease. Einkerk. She breathed in the swamp gases like it was fresh air, and smiled a toothy kobold smile, only slightly wider than the rictus she almost always wore. Even the name made her head fizz. She had caught snatches of tales about a legendary human city whenever humans had visited to trade, and most commonly from behind bushes near populated campfires, as she waited for them to sleep so she could trade for their food. She had in the past tried to trade with those types while they were awake, but only received some swift kicks to her scaly backside. Ironkirk was a place where the buildings rose to the sky instead of into the ground, where you could step into a place and a total stranger would give you alcohol, where you could walk around freely without needing to watch out for rocks, snares, spinning blades, or any other kind of kobold trap imaginable. What's more, it was a place where you could step into a place and a total stranger would give you alcohol. There was so much more to it, and it all sounded too good to be true. Most unbelievable of all was just how many human cities there seemed to be. She yearned to see them for herself, for she did not particularly care for her old lair. But the feeling did not quite breach hatred either. Her inordinately tall height of 3 feet and 4 inches had made her the target of all kinds of jeers from other kobolds, and her airy, vacant attitude, as well as her inexplicable inability to do just about anything right, had stuck her on permanent storeroom duty. And never the edible stuff either. She'd been allowed there at the beginning, but even though she tried to only eat the stuff that others wouldn't miss, it still had landed her in the stuffy underbelly where all the coal and compost was handled. Though her desire to leave and the desire to explore were strong, they had not been enough to drag her from her quiet, cozy sleeping spot between 2 crates near the furnace. That was until during one of her nocturnal attempts to trade for food, she had stumbled upon a strange camp filled with humans, dressed in snappy clothes and with 2 circles of glass affixed to their eyes. That was when she had heard about it. The universe, Itty. Several kobolds, herself not included, were very clever and could speak on even terms with the humans, going as far as to swindle them with only words and cunning, which was often the case whenever human traders came by and were cleverly convinced to purchase carefully painted stones in place of fine ores. Or even their wagons could accidentally be damaged by a mysterious contraption outside the grounds, and the generous kobolds would offer repairs for free in return for a few secretive clawfuls of grains or pinches of spice here and there. Never enough to draw attention, of course. Yes, kobolds were smart. But why was it that humans ruled so much of the land and sea, built great cities, and created such incredible devices that weren't designed to maim or kill, but not kobolds? Salvi had thought about it long and hard, but the answer had never come to her, until she learned of it. The universe, Itty. It was a place where humans went to become smart, where they could extract brilliant ideas and inventions and build them on the mortal plane. It was obviously some kind of pocket dimension, whose singular purpose was doling out and distributing knowledge. She knew this because of the one time the last local magician, Kauba, had accidentally ripped into an alternative dimension. Although she had not seen the particular portal, much less the opening itself, the aftermath had been impossible to ignore. And after an 8-day ordeal which had played out like a bad trip on those poisonous forest mushrooms even the most desperate of kobolds wouldn't eat, the existence of such things had been thoroughly imprinted onto her mind. Though the human's portal seemed to disperse knowledge instead of several things she chose pointedly to forget. After listening to the humans for some time, she had learned that Itty, she called it for short, was located in the city of Panas, A city even more legendary than the legendary city of Einkak. It was then that she realized something. If she could find this city and enter it, or even take it for her own, she could bring it back to her lair, and she would become a hero. And all those kobolds that had called her ditzy or dumb would choke on their shame indeed. Yes, it was a perfect plan, one she had been brewing for weeks after that first fateful night. And when human traders came with news that kobolds could enter the human cities to the west, so long as they were in no group larger than 3, it was as if the hand of fate had reached down and pushed her down the path of destiny. Although Salvi herself lacked a head for such metaphysical metaphors, and would have simply described the serendipitous news as good, or more likely, great. Immediately after receiving the news, she had asked for directions to Panas, and set out instantly, without sparing a single thought for clothes or provisions. A path that had ultimately brought her to where she was now, wandering the banks of the Flemic River, through mud and bugs. She continued on the knot path for a long time, through dense spring foliage like an uncaring bovine, that would have left her looking striped and bloody, if not for the scales protecting her skin. Eventually the land evened out and opened into a sun-soaked grassy plain that her cold blood appreciated greatly. For a long while it all looked to be much of the same, until something appeared on the horizon. It was a human, she could tell, standing on some kind of wooden platform extending into the river. She almost choked on her excitement. She ran to it as fast as her clattering feet could carry her. The swarthy man on deck was leaning leisurely on his barge pole. He appeared to be in his middle years, and only crooked his eyebrow in the most mild form of perplexity possible as a strange kobold came to a skidding stop, spewing loam beneath her toes. "Hello!" "Ho, little kobold." He eyed her up and down, scanning the horizon, and shifted his hip to display the long knife hung at his belt as if to say, "Don't even think about any of that kobold nonsense with me." But his subtlety was entirely wasted on her. "Where shall we find Einkirk?" "Einkirk?" He tilted his head and squinted. She handed him the crumpled piece of tree bark and pointed at it excitedly. "Einkirk!" He stared at the map, then to her, his face twisted in a complicated mix of pity, amusement, and utter incredulity. "Bleeding hell, mate, how did you end up down here looking for an Einkirk? This here's the ferry to Luhorm. If you're looking for Einkirk, you're about 3 weeks, of course, that away. 11 days on oars, I suppose." He shrugged. "Not Einkirk?" "Not in the slightest." Salvi's cheerful smile cracked and melted. Liquid eyes overflowed. She stared up at the man with such ineffable sadness that he felt a sudden pang of guilt for the perfect stranger. "Mate, if you're needing some directions to Einkirk, I can give you something." He glanced at the bark in his hand. "Something better than this." "Salvi not want." She threw her hands up in a huff, passing through the stages of grief with remarkable speed. "Salvi never do anything right." She fell onto her back with her arms outstretched and stared to the sky. What's a kobold like you doing looking for Einkirk anyway? He asked, but Salvi only rolled over petulantly. Come now, don't give me any of that. He grumbled, wondering why he needed to play counselor to some random kobold he'd never met, dressed in what appeared to be a burlap sack, coated in mud and leaves. She also smelled, quite frankly, horrible. Look, mate. Miss? Miss? The differences between male and female were not as obvious between kobolds as they were humans. But the width of her hips and the slenderness of her shoulders led him to believe she was the latter. She didn't correct him, so he assumed the guess to be the correct. Look here, miss. This be the ferry to Lauhorm. I'll take you across for 5 10 coppers, or whatever you got worth 5 coppers. Walk the city, hit the pubs, rent an inn, or whatever makes ya feel better and charter the next ship to Einkirk. Won't take you more than a week by river. She remained on her side, silent, armed crossed in a tantrum. Normally he would have left it at that and went back to leaning on his barge pole. But truth be told, he was a little curious what business alone, apparently impoverished kobold, had in a city like Einkirk. He changed tack. Still, to come this far on your own is quite something. Her head perked up a bit. Whatever you got in Einkirk must have been something very important. She shot up on her palms. Yes, very important. That was so easy it actually concerned him. Ho! He breathed, trying to sound impressed. But what could be so important that only one such as yourself had to do it? Salvi, look for Itty. Itty? Who's Itty? Not who. Itty plays. Aight, lil kobold. Where's Itty then? Panas. Itty in Panas. In Panas? Was it some kind of street or district? He had never heard of an Itty in Panas, but he had only ever been there once. He wasn't going to pretend to be an expert on the capital city or anything. Salvi need find Panas, and that mean need find Einkirk first. But Salvi messed up and find Lahorm instead. Salvi big stupid. Salvi not even able to read map. She began to sulk again. He stroked his shin. If it's Panas you're looking for, it's about as far from here as it is from Einkirk. Salvi shot up, loping towards the ferryman like some sort of beast. He flinched. She gripped the hem of his shirt with both hands and stared up at him with hopeful, shimmering eyes as if he held the key to her dreams in his pocket. Not lie! Yeah. He held out the map-like piece of bark and traced his finger across its crumbling surface. Ya see, the river splits like this. You're here, and Einkirk's on this side. His fingers traced off into the air. Panas is all the way up here, where the rivers meet. If you pass through Klosterfelk and Grimbark, long that away, it'll take you about 5 weeks. He wheezed as Salvi squeezed the air out of his stomach with a low, tight hug. He separated himself from her with a gentle but firm push, and she tottered breezily. She smiled once again, and all was right with the world.
Thank you, long-stick-holding human.
Call me Broman. He waved his hand dismissively.
Broman,
she echoed. Saying it was fun.
Lohom not bad at all. Shall we ride boat now?
She asked, but was already walking towards a small craft bobbing in the river. Hold up, little Kobold. He stopped her with an outstretched arm, which was admittedly somewhat awkward given her height. I'm not running on alms here. 5 coppers to get you across. If you can't afford it, there's a bridge about a day's walk from here. Salvi blinked to him, then to the river.
Salvi swim then. Salvi good swimmer.
She said matter-of-factly, as if it were the most logical thing to do, and took another step forward. Stop right there, you damned crazy kobold. The river's over a mile wide and colder than a witch's tit in winter on the peak of Mount Bleedin' Svern. And if you weren't a bleeding cold-blooded creature, I still wouldn't let you go. I'm not about to let you kill yourself 'cause you can't afford the fare. If you got anything to trade.
Trade?
Her eyes lit up. Yeah, trade. So he said, but he sincerely doubted those clothes of hers, which might have looked fashionable on a particularly misshapen potato, contain much of worth. Trade. Salvi thought for a while. Could she wait until dark and trade for his boat? No. He most likely took the boat to the other side after he finished working. And besides, she understood the concept of a boat. But the actual intricacies of its operation remained quite mysterious. Unfortunately, she had to do it while the owner was around, which was always the hardest kind of trade. Berman watched impatiently as she fished out an odd assortment of leaves, rocks, and other sylvan bounties. His eyebrow quirked at a jagged, red-rimmed leaf that he, after ferrying all sorts of men from all sorts of professions, was fairly sure was deadly poisonous and a favourite among assassins. Truthfully, they were the only thing in her possession worth any money. But he wasn't about to break into the black market just to cash in some of the kobold's pocket trash. Finally she reached the last item, a smooth stone that might have had worth if he were 30 years younger, and still skipping stones on the riverbank. He shook his head, and she frowned. She crossed her arms, screwed her eyes closed, and tilted her head, which he decided was her thinking face. The seconds hung until she burst with inspiration. Spinning, she turned around from the ferryman and sat on the edge of the stairs. From behind, Berman could only see her hands twisting and fiddling. She unravelled a portion of her clothes and suddenly grunted, head jerking, an event that repeated itself for some time. Finally she stood, satisfied, and walked over to the ferryman, a look of self-satisfied triumph dominating her face. She opened her hand to reveal a row of kobold teeth woven into some kind of makeshift trinket, and smiled. Gapped-toothed and gums bloody, Berman pulled back in revulsion.
No worry, grow back.
that was not what he was worried about, but let her believe his look of disgust was actually concern. He scratched his head at a loss. In all his years, he had never actually seen anyone maim themselves to try and cross. The bloody trinket hung between them. The seconds stretched. Salvi's once proud smile began to... "Aye, fine." He snatched the trinket from her hands. "Now clean yourself off and get in the boat, for I change my mind. I won't have ya taking that mud all over my hole." Salvi bounced unbrilliantly and bounded for the ladder on the side of the dock to dunk herself in the water. Berman stared at the trinket, which appeared to be necklace-sized for a kobold and bracelet-sized for a human. Well, if anything, he should get at least 5 coppers worth from it as a conversation starter at the pub tonight.
"Ah, water, cold!"